In 1961, Kennedy delivered a speech in which he declared that the United States would go to the moon in that decade. Between the years of 1957 and 1975, space exploration was the new way to gain power and reputation. The United States had fallen behind Russia in the space race and was starting to scramble for a plan. The race to space wasn't only driven by the gain of power for America, it was also driven by fear. According to the television series Conspiracy, NASA was far behind and couldn't even get a ship into orbit. They had more than 20 failed missions before building a rocket that would barely work. NASA wasn't very superior in the science and math part, however. They were very superior in public relations. A big chunk of NASA's budget went to the reputation of the astronauts. They were even presented as American heroes. NASA was getting ready to perform their first test launch of Apollo 1, but many people on the team, including lead astronaut Gus Grissom, thought the mission was being rushed. He thought speed was becoming more important than safety. Grissom was the most adored astronaut by the public, so he was picked to be the first man on the moon. But he was also the most critical of all the astronauts and the most outspoken. Grissom wrote many reports to show that the program was falling apart. On January 27th, during the final systems test before the launch, Grissom and the other astronauts were killed. There was a fire in the cockpit, and since the oxygen percentage was so high, the ship burnt very quickly. Bart Sibrel, a very vocal supporter of the theory that the moon landing was fake, believes the fire was no accident. He says Grissom was outspoken and a critic of the program, so there was no way he would have gone along with a fake moon landing. Grissom hung a lemon on the module simulator to show that it was a broken down piece of junk, and that he was worried. Sibrel says the government wanted to get rid of Grissom, but so the public would not get suspicious, 2 other astronauts were also killed. After the fire, America's space program was suspended. The Soviet Sputnik force launch was on October 4, 1957, and 2 Italian brothers wanted to see if they could connect themselves with it, and they managed to hear the frequency. After this, they became very interested in the space race and decided to make their own private listening post. With the listening post, they could eavesdrop on future space missions. The brothers claimed to have found 3 manned Soviet launches that ended in tragedy that were before their first actual manned mission. In February of 1961, the brothers were listening in a Soviet mission and heard difficult breathing. This made the brothers think the air supply was cut off during the mission. The Soviet Union had not announced a manned mission on this day. The brothers became very famous after exposing the manned mission, even so that they were able to create their own private mission control. When using this mission control, the brothers discovered an even more disturbing secret Soviet mission in October of 1963. They heard a woman's voice and got a Russian translator to roughly translate the recording. Her voice was dramatic, and at one point she mentioned that she saw a flame. Her voice sounded very worried. She asked the Soviet mission control if she would ever get back, and the communication stopped. These missions showed that it was very difficult to get a ship to land on the moon. Former NASA mission controller James Oberg found evidence that the Soviets were trying to hide something. He found duplicated photos, but in one copy, a cosmonaut would be erased. In place of the missing person, you might see a shadow, or the person's hand would still be on the next person's shoulder. This was a popular technique from the earliest days of the Soviet Union. These photos were leaked because the Soviets couldn't control all the lies they were telling. Records of the missing people's deaths have not been found. There is no evidence that they died here on Earth. This led conspiracists to believe that the people in the recordings found by the Italian brothers may have been the missing people in the photographs. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped off the lunar model Eagle during a live broadcast with an audience of over 600 million. This mission was known as Apollo 11. Armstrong was named the first man on the moon, but he was really the first man to step off a spacecraft in a studio. It is obviously easier to make a movie about going to Mars than it is actually to go to Mars, especially in the 60s. Marcus Allen, a journalist, believed there was a very different mission being planned, a Plan B to fake the moon landing. Conspiracists believed the fake landing was recorded at a military base known as Area 51, in a circular room to get a convincing 360 panoramic picture. They also point out the fact that there was no independent witnesses. People say they were there, but they were actually just watching a fuzzy black and white television. 30 years after the landing, Cabral found a piece of evidence that very strongly suggests the moon landing was fake. It was a film, and the first screen said, "The film of the Apollo 11 mission was produced as a report by the Manned Spacecraft Center and is not for the general public distribution." The first thing you hear is NASA saying that the TV picture looks great. According to the officials at NASA, the pictures were taken over 100,000 miles from Earth, but at that distance, communication is delayed. There is exactly 4 seconds of dead air, and then you can hear a third party, not NASA, say, "talk." Then Armstrong starts talking. This suggests he had an earpiece and someone with a stopwatch was counting off 4 seconds to fake the communication delay to make the public believe Apollo 11 was halfway to the moon. Conspiracists look at the photos taken by Apollo 11 to find evidence that the landing was fake. Cabral noticed the lighting was odd. In one picture, you see a shadow over an astronaut, but he is very well lit. This leads Cabral to believe the pictures were taken with electrical lighting. The camera being used on the moon did not have a viewfinder, so the astronauts had to set everything themselves, which would be almost impossible wearing the gloves and the spacesuit. Marcus Allen noticed the pictures were very well taken, and he doesn't think the most iconic pictures taken during the 20th century were really taken on the moon. The video of the American flag waving on the moon also led many people to believe the moon landing was fake. There is no atmosphere on the moon, so there is no wind. Cabral thinks the air conditioning caused the flag to occasionally raise. Bart Cabral was 100% sure the moon landing was fake. He has spent many years trying to prove that Armstrong's one small step was not taken on the moon. But in a TV studio on Earth, Cabral went around to the men involved in the moon landings and asked them to swear on the Bible that they had actually landed on the moon, and none of them did. He says that if he walked on the moon, he would have found it hysterical that people asked him to swear on the Bible that he walked on the moon. Cabral says the astronauts reacted the opposite. Whether the moon landing was fake or not, the United States definitely won the space race. With space exploration being another way to show domination, and America falling behind to Russia, it was not unlikely the moon landings were faked. Although July 20th, 1969 was a very unforgettable day, the mystery of the moon landings remained unsolved. Thank you.